know we're a minute early, but I think it'll be on the hour soon, and the song ended, so I figured, why not? Let's just get started. And hopefully, right as I transition over to you, Barbara, it'll turn right to 10. We're so happy to have everyone with us, and thank you so much for being here, Barbara. Can't wait to learn from you.
Thank you so very much. I am thrilled to be here, and thank you to Temple Israel of Boston and all of you who are joining this session. We have a nice number on, and so we're going to do our best to be as interactive as possible using the chat, on unleashing some voices in other ways, because that's what this is all about. I am currently in Westchester, New York, an hour north of New York City. I have a pulpit in on City Island in the Bronx, as well as in Putnam Valley, a little bit north. So I go right or left, as it were, when I leave my house. Great to be with you, and I want to be able to try to watch the chat also. But Fallon, if you are able to help, like if something comes out and just want to say, hey, maybe you didn't see this one, that'd be just fabulous. So I am going to screen share. Usually when I do this, you see all kinds of craziness on my screen, so we'll see how badly that goes. But oh, not too bad this time. So let's get right into it, into the slideshow. Okay. So there are a lot of voices coming at us these days, which I'm sure you all are well aware. It is hard to get away from them. And so whether they are coming through, updates on your phone or whatever, on the news, on the whatever, right? There are a lot of voices. And yet prophetic voices are sorely lacking, as I want to just kind of point out and then go from there. But before we do, let's just think about who are the prophets themselves. So when we think about the prophets, we think about, and I'm going to show you literally who they are in a few minutes, but we think about largely the Nun people. So in Tanakh, the middle letter Nun, Nevi'im, means prophets, but there are prophets that are not only within Nevi'im. And so we're going to look at this for a second. If God hired you to write a help wanted ad for a prophet, what qualities would you be looking for? So if you want to write in the chat, or if you want to unmute and share whatever's going to work for us, I am ready to go, as long as I can figure out how to see it. Oh, that didn't work. How to see the chat at the same time. But anyone have any thoughts about this? And somehow I'm not seeing the chat as I'm screen sharing, so that's not going to, oh, there it is. Okay, we got one. Now I can see it. Okay, speak the truth no matter what. Great. What else you got? Speak in ways we can hear. Passionate. Fearless. Advancing the best interest of all humanity, prophet's ability to be heard by others, so deliver in a way that makes you accessible even when not acceptable. Interesting. Charisma, speak in ways that tell truths, plural, to people in power. I'm just reading these if you happen to be on your phone or whatever. I was for a previous session led by Shari, who's on, did a fabulous job with Akdamut. Of course she did. Okay, writer speaks with vivid imagery. So if you're on your phone, you can't read all these. I'm just repeating them back, right? So it's really interesting and they're still coming, so this is great. And so someone whose heart isn't hardened from all the acute and chronic traumas, which is interesting, right? I mean, if you're called by God, you can really stick with it. So we also could say that they have to really be able to be persistent, right? Consistent and persistent. Shari, maybe that's an Akdamut idea for you in the future. Honesty, compassion, inclusion, love, and justice. Right? DEI, very interesting, right? We're going to get into all of this kind of stuff. Engaging, charismatic, funny. All right, so I'm going to love this. Tenacity is a better word than what I use, so thank you to Olivia. So when we think about this, you can still write in the chat, and I'm going to try to look at them, and I'm certainly going to save it so that I can look at it later as well, because I always learn, of course, from everyone. And so, by the way, if you save the chat now, it saves even for by the end. So it's the 3 little dots in the chat box, because you all are having great comments, of course. So when we think about this, let's think about this, right? Yeah, I wonder if it's a positive outlook, and we're gonna really look at that. So Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, because like, how do you teach without talking about Jonathan Sachs, has this to say. So would anyone like to raise a hand and be willing to read this to us? You're going to get stuck with my voice a lot if you're going to only hear me. All right, for now, I'll read. In the future, if you're thinking, hey, I want to read out loud, then you will. Okay. Who is a leader of the Jewish people? Only one who loves the Jewish people. Reading the prophetic literature, it is easy to see the prophets as social critics, but the prophets loved their people. They spoke not out of condemnation, but from the depths of deep desire. They knew that Israel was capable of and had been summoned to great things. They never criticized in order to distance themselves, to set themselves above and apart. They spoke in love, God's love. So when we think about the prophets, if they're coming out of a place of love and often putting themselves in a place of danger, or at least we'll call it in today's words, vulnerability, right? Then they are doing it out of love. I think it's just a beautiful way that Rabbi Sachs wrote that. So if we continue on to look at this, here are the actual prophets. Here's a list, Jewish Virtual Library, so you can look at it as I'm speaking. I'm not going to read it to you. So the Megillah, actually, sorry, not the Megillah, Talmud Megillah. So in the Talmud, Megillah 14a, if you want to go, says that there have been twice as many prophets as the number of people who left Egypt. Wow, that's a lot of people. But only those whose messages were for future generations were recorded. So that's interesting. We get down to 48. I'm going to talk about the 47, 48 with the question marks in a second. But only those whose messages were beyond that generation. And that's really interesting, right? If someone's speaking to us in the today and now, can their words be really heard in the future, right? Are they still going to be relevant? While Jews don't have prophets anymore and haven't since the Second Temple, how relevant are these words here even, right? So traditionally, we're going to talk about them more. Traditionally, there are 48 male and 7 female prophets. You're actually going to see that they're not all Jewish prophets. So Balaam is one of our famous ones who is not a Jewish prophet. But when we look at this, there are debates. Should Daniel be a prophet? Rashi thought that he wasn't a prophet and he should be replaced, because 2 Jews, 3 opinions, and that's how things like work. Rashi comments also that 2 of the prophets, he doesn't know them. Oh my gosh, are we going to know them? Refers to 47 and 48 who become question marks. Another commentator says the missing 2 prophets are Oded and Hanani Haroeh. So do with that what you will, but this is our list traditionally accepted of the Hebrew prophets. And again, Hebrew prophets does not have to mean Jewish prophets. So let's go to this next question here. And that is, when do Jews encounter the prophets? So when do we actually come across the prophets? So anyone have any thoughts on that? When do we see the prophets? During times of trial and tribulations. Interesting. So we might, right? We'd have to write open up a text in some way to get that right when we're misbehaving. And when do we encounter them, right, in terms of, right, prophets spoke through dreams in one of the ways that God came to people. I should say it that way. I said it the backwards way. And yet, right, when I ask when did Jews encounter the prophets, it's interesting because unless we open a source for it, we're not encountering the prophets, right? So when do you, when does the Jewish community today encounter the prophets? And I think I have to reword my question for the future. When do you hear from, like, I don't know, Isaiah or Jonah or Ezekiel or, all of these other 55 prophets, right? Shabbat morning. Um, and specific and seders we might, right, when reading Torah, right? So when we think of Moses as the greatest prophet, it's interesting because he is found within the five books of Moses, as is Miriam, obviously, and others. And so we hear that, and yet, right, the primary is probably Ruth Alper, classmate, yay. You get the number one answer, right? So on Family Feud, you'd win. So most commonly through the Haftarah, which is the associated text, and we're going to look more at that, with the Torah portion or the holiday, right? So what does that mean? That means that of all the Jews out there, if they want to encounter the prophets, I mean, you can always open up the Tanakh, right, and start reading. But if you're going to encounter them, most likely, right, you're going to be a member of a synagogue, and of those members of synagogue, it's already a small proportion, too small proportion of Jews per Pew report, right? Then we're going to get even further smaller to those who are showing up on Shabbat morning or on festival mornings, right? Because that is the most likely, right? We also have other examples, right? They're often quoted in sermons, they're quoted in Siddur and music, right? In the prayer book and in music. We often say, oh yeah, right, Dr. King, he used the prophets, he spoke of Amos and Isaiah and so forth, right? But it's interesting because a lot of us just really don't hear the prophetic voices so much. So let's go to a definition here of just what is Haftarah, since that was actually the number one answer. Number one, just in terms of how often might we encounter the prophets, right? So it literally means conclusion or dismissal, right? It's like, hey, kiddush lunch is almost here. It's at the end of it's the second and ending sacred reading, right? So you have something from the Torah, and then you have a next reading, and then you basically get to put the Torah away. Maybe there's a sermon, maybe there isn't, but Aleinu, Kaddish, closing song, eat, right? So these are all from Nevi'im, the second section of the Hebrew Bible, though it does not include all the prophets found there and only cites a small portion of the prophets' writings that are included. So if Isaiah wrote this much, even though Isaiah often shows up as Haftarah, we hear like a tiny sliver of what Isaiah has said, right? And if we went backwards here, sorry, bunch of clicking, a lot of the prophets we are not going to encounter in Haftarah because they're found in the Torah, right? Sarah and Miriam, right, to start out with, right? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Aaron, right? Joshua, though we also get him later, right? And others, right? So it's interesting in terms of when do we who do we actually hear when we encounter the prophets? So going forward, I want to bring this forward because I want to get into text. And I want to point out here what the blessing says. Now, remember, the blessing was written by rabbis, and this is the just translation that kind of was standard to me. But here it is, right? Praise to you, Adonai our God, sovereign of the universe, who has chosen faithful prophets to speak words of truth. Praise to you, Adonai, for the revelation of Torah, for your servant Moses, for your people Israel, and for the prophets of truth and righteousness, right? So we're going to see that at the end of the blessing here in Hebrew. And if we think about it, what is the Haftarah blessing before the Haftarah is read or chanted saying to us about who the prophets are? And as you're thinking about that, I'll say the blessing after is one of those like kitchen sink ones. It's very much parallel to Birkat Hamazon. You've eaten your meal and now just pray about kind of everything. So Haftarah after is much more about that. But let's just think about this. What is the setup that the rabbis are doing about the prophets here? So does anyone have any anything they're thinking about here in terms, because how often do we even hear the English of the Haftarah blessing, right? Any thoughts about this? The setup, the framing for hearing prophetic voices. I'll give you a second. Okay, so I'm gonna keep talking just so we can get to places where a lot of hopefully we'll hear other voices as well. So so I think first of all it's really interesting, right? It becomes a chain of tradition, right? We get from God to the revelation of Torah. That's what we're celebrating in Shavuot today, right? For your servant Moses, right, who of course passes it down, right, and for your people Israel. So Moses brings it to the people, and for the prophets who come later, who are going to bring forward truth and righteousness. And as Barbara is saying, right, the truth of the prophet's words, right, which is really interesting, right? So if we go back to the description of the prophet really needs to be able to get people's attention. So even if it's like an exaggeration, right, of words that are not exactly truth, but speaking to the truth, like, you know, if Israel will follow God, then the mountains will dance with joy, right? Something along those lines. That sounded a little psalmy, but whatever, right? We know the mountains are going to actually physically dance, but we get it. But the prophets are going to use everything they possibly can to make it so people are not only listening up, but they're doing something about it, right? They're going to use all kind of creative language. They're going to use all kind of metaphors. If you were listening to last week, which was yesterday's, Haftarah about Hosea, we're going to actually look at Hosea because I always use it as an example, even not on the week when it just passed. Sometimes it's interesting what metaphors they use, but they're going to use everything at their disposal to be able to get the word out. So we have this chain of tradition, but we also have this idea of seeing the prophets as kind of the proto-rabbis. So think of how much like the rabbis, I don't know, kind of give themselves credit there. But if the chain of tradition is the prophets are kind of the proto-rabbis and then the rabbis come, right, that they're right in the chain of tradition, the rabbis are, but also just this idea of how it is that we are finding the balance between how much of Haftarah becomes about the prophets and how much is about the rabbis of what they chose to be the Haftarah. And increasingly, while I'm teaching this, I'm finding that that is the biggest question for me. So the rabbis of the first centuries are really the ones developing this. So while we only have 50 minutes, I only went into this so much, but can go into so much. But we know that the Haftarah was starting to be read as early as Jesus's time, which sounds like kind of a funny way for us to frame things. But the reason we know that is because in the New Testament, it says that Jesus went to preach in the Galilee and he spoke after the prophetic portion was shared. So we have actual sacred text for others, right, in the New Testament, telling us that Haftarah was already starting to be, but the rabbis took a long time to develop the cycle. So the first cycle developed was around Passover with multiple Haftarot week after week. And then it developed more and more. And finally, after a couple of centuries, we got into having it for all of the holidays, for all of the Shabbatot and everything. So again, how much is about rabbis, how much are prophets? And part of this to me opens up a creative possibility here. So so let's just look at, you know, these top billing, as I like to call them, top billing prophetic voices, right? We love these ones, right? Let justice well up like water, righteousness like an unfailing stream. Granted, there are other translations for that, from Amos. You have been told, O mortal, what is good and what God requires of you, only to do justice and to love goodness and to walk modestly with your God. Right? Fabulous. And then Isaiah, very familiar to a lot of us because it's Yom Kippur morning, is such the fast I desire, a day for people to starve their bodies. Do you call that a fast? a day when God is favorable. No, this is the fast I desire, to unlock fetters of, not fetters, I don't say the word fetters very often, fetters of wickedness, and untie the cords of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke. It is to share your bread with the hungry, and to take the wretched poor into your home. When you see the naked, to clothe them, and not to ignore your own kin. So as we look at this, right, we're all about these. I think, right, we like these ones. We're not looking at the context. We might not know who Amos is, or who Mike is, or who Isaiah is, and when do they live, and what was their context and stuff. But this, for modern ears, this works well for us, right? We like it. It's a call to action. This is my big phrase I use all the time. Call to action. We got to be doing stuff here, right? If you're going to go in, oh yeah, I fasted, right? But we're still kind of, schmoes. That doesn't really do what Yom Kippur is meant to do, right? And I think of when I was applying to rabbinical school, I went to HUC. I had a Catholic roommate who's very religious. She was my age. We were both in our 20s, and she just couldn't stand people that showed up to midnight mass to say they went to midnight mass, right? She went to mass all the time. It was so deeply meaningful for her. So too, right? We don't want empty rituals here, right? That's not what this is supposed to be about. And this calls us out. And frankly, even if we are not well enough, we're taking medication, whatever the thing is, to actually fast, point taken. Yeah, right? Get on it, right? Treat people the way that we need to treat them. So that being said, there are barriers connecting to the Haftarah, to hearing the prophetic call. So I'm wondering if you can give some thought to what are those barriers, right? Why aren't people hearing the prophets, and again, the prophetic call of going out and doing something? So if you want to write in the chat, you can. If you want to raise a physical hand, or easier, an emoji hand, please do that. Fear, interesting. Oh, Rob, if you want to write more, if you want to speak, that'd be great to better hear it. I'm sorry, to better, understand what you're saying fully. Not truly connecting with the words and their meaning, right? That's really hard. Like I said, if we don't even know who Hosea is, we don't know what his context is. But also just this idea of what? We're picking up on chapter 4 of a prophet. What came before? What's coming after? We don't know. People think the prophets are too idealistic, which is really interesting in these socially and politically fraught times. Thank you, Jeffrey. There are a lot of barriers. There are a lot of barriers. And there are barriers in terms of, probably you have to be on that Shabbat morning sitting at worship. And even if you're there, chances are it's in Hebrew. So you might understand it, but if you don't understand it, that's a barrier. If you're going to read it in English, it's kind of hard because someone's chanting out loud, so it's hard to concentrate. And it's often not even described, right? You just hear the reading. We got through that. Let's go on. Many congregations just skip it altogether. Granted, probably more liberal congregations, traditional congregations, but it could be skipped. And I think it's interesting, right? If there's a bar mitzvah service, B mitzvah service, and the student might spend weeks and weeks or months and months learning the Haftarah, and then no one's telling them, well, okay, well, here is who this prophet was, and here is what the message actually means, or what came before, or what we can do with this, or right? We lack that. We do that all about the Torah, but we often lack. That's another barrier to it, right? And it's just so hard to be able to hear. So what are these? What are these voices actually saying to us? So here we go, a little bit of trauma, because, we have to keep you awake. So here we go. Last week's Haftarah. Oy vey. Hosea, the idea is the marriage, the metaphor that Hosea invented, right? So if you're singing Lecha Dodi or whatever, right? Other prophets use it as well, but between God and Jewish people, marriage, right? Rebuke your mother, rebuke her, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. And let her put away her harlotry from her face, and her adultery from between her breasts. Else will I strip her naked and leave her as on the day she was born. And I will make her like a wilderness, render her like desert land, and let her die of thirst. I will also disown her children, for they are now a harlot's brood. It goes on. Um, and it's hard language. Now we don't know from Hosea chapter 1, and frankly, I don't know if this is going to help us or not, that Hosea was commanded to marry a woman of harlotry or whoredom was the translation I was using on yesterday morning. Was it yesterday? No, I'm off a day. Sorry about that. Though when I'm talking about Shabbat, I meant 2 days ago. But right, so maybe that gives us some context. If nothing else, still disturbing. But okay, this is really hard stuff, right? So here is God kicking out for harlotry, which is going to be adultery also, right? Which is in this case of the metaphor, idolatry. Why is it harlotry? Because Israel, the people, is going out and worshiping Baal and, is sort of, doing that other thing, right? So Yes, so it was meant to be unfaithfulness to God, but the idea of the metaphor is really hard. And the idea is the unfaithfulness and the adultery is to other gods, especially Baal, the Assyrian gods. And the Assyrians are the ones that are currently attacking the northern kingdom of Israel. And he's in Judea saying, hey, people, this is coming, right? We got to get on this, right? We got to be acting differently, because if we are more uh, monotheistic, right? If we're really focused on God, then God's not going to let this happen to us. That's a different theology of we'd have to go into. But anyway, okay. But this is hard language, right? If I were using language like this with a B mitzvah kid, just in conversation or something else, I'd be in trouble, right? People would be like, oh, you can't speak like that to them, right? I mean, I could be, right, really reprimanded, if not more, right? Really? I'm going to strip her naked and leave her, right? Her adultery from between her breasts. Oh my gosh, right? We don't even give this out as an honor at B'nai Mitzvah services, right? Because to read it in English, because it's just hard. So Reverend Dr. Renita Weems writes in this really, really remarkable small book, I highly recommend it. Why should I, as a reader, leave the world where I presently live, where violence against wives is unjustifiable, to inhabit a world where violence against wives is taken for granted? The marriage metaphor is useless, therefore, for shedding light on the theological question of punishment and judgment. So, I mean, yes, 2 days ago, keep doing that. Do we say to the congregation assembled, okay, trigger warning, right? Or this is PG-13, right? Do we sort of introduce the prophets that way, right? So here we could say, look, the metaphor is really powerful. And if we stop and actually talk about it, we could get into it, but we generally don't, right? We don't even introduce it. We generally just get to blessing, haftarah, blessing, go on, right? Unless you're like really looking at the commentary in the Chumash and so forth, it's really hard to be able to, kind of be present with this and so forth. So really hard language. But I want to give you a what if, right? What if? What if? This is not a haftarah, but it's one that I actually used in the book I edited as an alternative. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. It's from First Kings. So Elijah's life was threatened by Queen Jezebel. I didn't give you the entirety of what I had quoted, right? It's not all 8 verses. But fearing this, Elijah fled at once for his life. He came to Beersheba in the territory of Judah, and there he left his servant behind. He went on a day's journey into the wilderness. So he was so way alone, right? He was so isolated. He came and sat under a broom bush, sounds like Moses a little bit, and prayed for death, like Jonah, saying, "It is too much. Take my life now, Eternal One. I am no better than my forebears." He lay down under the bush and fell asleep. So he's like given up. He's given up, right? Suddenly, an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around. There beside his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. After eating and drinking, he lay down again and slept. The angel of the Eternal came a second time and woke him, saying, "Get up and eat, or the journey will be too much for you." He got up and ate and drank, and that meal gave him enough strength to walk 40 days and nights as far as the mountain of God at Horeb. That's another name for Sinai. There he went into a cave and spent the night. Okay, so as an alternative, what if, first of all, there are haftarot that are narratives, right, rather than sort of a preachy, sermon kind of thing. It doesn't have to be a narrative. I think I respond better to narratives personally. I like the story aspect, but here is a prophetic voice, right? And here's a model, right, of how we care for each other. Bring the cake and the water, right? Bring the food sustenance, and then show up again the next day if it's needed, right? And he touched him, right? I love that, right? So whatever it means, an angel touches him, but an angel touches him, right? Think of Elijah was so isolated, right? Nobody's touching him. We know when that happens, right? We could think of COVID, we could think of AIDS, right? We can think originally, right, when it was newer, right? We could think of awful times when we are isolated and people don't have human touch, right? Starts by touching him, right? And so I think that to hear prophetic voices, partly to pull out from other part of the prophets, right? Because this is from the Nevi'im section, voices that we could say, yeah, hey, I get it. I could go forward. I could be doing something here. I know the importance of human touch. I know the importance of just showing up, right? And bringing what the person needs, right? And that whole thing of, rather than, be in touch with me when you need me to get you something, but I'm going to the grocery store now, what can I bring you, right? Even the change of language that way, right? To me, that's prophetic Judaism, right? And so I think that as we go forward, we're going to pull this a little bit, but we're going to go half a step back in order to go a step forward. And so what I want to do quickly is look at the Haftarah for Ezekiel. And since so far you haven't raised your hand, so you still could, you're stuck hearing my voice. This is taken from, so I have some parts where I skip through, but very famous. It's called Merkava Mysticism. Merkava means chariot. This is the Shavuot Haftarah, right? And Ezekiel's having this vision, right? I looked, and this is when he's first called, right? And so I looked, and lo, a stormy wind came sweeping out of the north, a huge cloud and flashing fire surrounded by a radiance. And in the center of it, in the center of the fire, a gleam as of amber. In the center of it were also the figures of 4 creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the figures of human beings. However, each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. The legs of each were fused into a single rigid leg. There's a little bit in between, but I'm skipping forward. They had human hands below their wings. The 4 of them had their faces and their wings on their 4 sides. A little bit more. Each of them had a human face at the front. Each of the 4 had a face of a lion on the right. Each of the 4 had a face of an ox on the left. And each of the 4 had the face of an eagle at the back. And each could move in the direction of any of its faces. They went wherever the Spirit impelled them to go without turning when they moved. With them was something that looked like burning coals of fire. This fire, suggestive of torches, kept moving about among the creatures. The fire had a radiance, and a lightning issued from the fire. As I gazed on the creatures, I saw one wheel on the ground next to each of the 4-faced creatures. All 4 had the same form. The appearance and structure of each was as of 2 wheels cutting through each other. I'm soon to ask you, what is the call to action from this reading? Okay, so I just want you to know that's coming. And when they moved, each could move in the direction of any of its 4 quarters. They did not veer when they moved. Their rims were tall and frightening, for the rims of all 4 were covered all over with eyes. Wherever the Spirit impelled them to go, they went. Wherever the Spirit impelled them, and the wheels were borne alongside them, for the spirit of the creatures was in the wheels. And then it jumps, which is interesting. Sometimes prophets have to jump a little, but it's interesting that this does, right? So we had started we would have started Ezekiel 1:1 and gone straight to 28. I started Ezekiel 4, but it's skipping down here, right? So this is the last part of the first part, and then we skip a lot. So it makes it into a different message, right? So it means the rabbis are playing with this, right? Like the appearance of the bow that shines in the clouds on a day of rain, such was the appearance of the surrounding radiance. That was the appearance of the semblance of the presence of God. When I beheld it, I flung myself down on my face and I heard the voice of someone speaking. Big jump, but textually, we're just continually reading, right? And I heard the voice of someone speaking. Then a spirit carried me away, and behind me I heard a great roaring sound. Blessed is the presence of God in its place. So if we think of the reason, right, we have prophetic reading, right? If it's to call us out, if it's to get us acting, right? If there's a reason to have another sacred text after the first one that is connecting either to the holiday or to the text, or is meant to get us thinking about how to reconcile, in Heschel's words, reconcile ourselves with God, right? Or how to bring us back into the land and into sovereignty and into the temple, which is other purposes of prophecy. The question is, what do we do with this one? And part of it is, if it's just as Haftarah, it's gone by, right? Yes, it's become a huge practice of, I think I read the years were 100 to 1,000 in particular, where the years 100 to year 1,000 of Merkava mysticism, but it's still in effect. So we have that kind of in a separate place in this case, but as Haftarah, it's now gone by. What do you do with it? So what is our prophetic call from this? I'm going to keep talking. So here, but I hope you're still going to continue to think about writing in the chat or raising your hand. So in the book I edited, right, Cantor Lauren Phillips Fogelman brings this forward. This is the end of what she wrote, but they were all short passages anyway. She says, Reform Judaism teaches that receiving Torah at Sinai is not celebrated as a singular mystical moment of divine revelation. And yet many of us are yearning for spiritual moments like the one Ezekiel describes. How can we make more space for moments like these? I love what she writes because she's bringing it forward. And you know what? When we hear a prophetic call, it doesn't only have to be what we might think is social justice. There are other aspects, like I showed you with First Kings, of how to have care and concern for our neighbors. That one isn't part of the traditional Haftarah cycle. But I offered as an alternative Behalotcha. That was the one when Miriam gets leprosy, and we could go into the whole reason to that. But anyway, so here we have okay, here's a question to us, right? Here's a call to action. How can we make more space, right? With all these like voices going around we talked about before, right? With all that are on our to-do list, if we want to be able to have some kind of a mystical experience, we have to make an effort for it, right? So Barbara writes, different challenges call for different responses using all faces. Love that. Angels had human as well as holy features, since we as humans need to act in the image of God. Just beautiful, right? Wind being something powerful but not visible, right? Great. And I'm looking on my bookshelf, but I'm not sure if I'm going to grab the name right now. There's a fabulous, here it is. Nope, that's not it. Sorry, I'm looking at this book and I wish I could see it. But an author, a rabbi who lives with disabilities, writes about this text was what brought her, and if you know it, write it into the chat. She's so fabulous. brought in, this text brought her in because she is wheelchair bound. And when she was reading about the wheels being able to, bring you forward and even into the sky, as it were, because I didn't read that part, but even lift you up, she completely felt seen. And she writes about it in such a tremendously powerful way. So it's really interesting, right? There are ways it can bring you forward, but part of it is you have to stop and actually look at it, right? If it's going to be kind of a quickie, it makes it harder, as does anything, right? So I want to challenge us, right? I want to bring us forward with the what if, but what if, right? So here we go. You might be familiar with this. What if on Shavuot, we heard Meryl Feld is not a prophet. I think she's fabulous, but she's not a prophet. But I will call it a prophet-like voice. What if we heard this instead? My brother and I were at Sinai. He kept a journal of what he saw, what he heard, what it all meant to him. I wish I had such a record of what happened to me there. It seems like every time I want to write, I can't. I'm always holding a baby, one of my own or one for a friend, always holding a baby. So my hands are never free to write things down. And then as time passes, the particulars, the hard data, the who, what, when, where, why slip away from me. And all I'm left with is a feeling. But feelings are just sounds, the vowel barking of a mute. My brother is so sure of what he heard. After all, he's got a record of it. Consonant after consonant after consonant. If we remembered it together, we could recreate holy time, sparks flying. So this is an alternative Haftarah. Remember, Haftarah does not mean prophets. It means conclusionary reading. For some people, if they're at synagogue, it might completely feel uncomfortable to go beyond what the traditional cycle is. For others, they might be comfortable. And by the way, in the book, there are alternative blessings because we're not going to call them prophets, and the blessings refer to prophets. But at the same time, it also might be that it just comes up as a reading, or midweek as Shavuot is approaching, that we say, hey, you know what? Let's open up this study session, or let's open up religious school, or let's do whatever, right? Using this kind of text. So what I want to do is share a little bit of what Rabbi Audrey Pollack brings forward in her interpretation of. So what do we do with that? Yes, Julia Watts-Belzer, you have to get this book. She is so remarkably just able. She's just able in so many ways of bringing her full self together so we can bring our full selves together. Okay, so Rabbi Audrey Pollack, by the way, another of Ruth's and my classmates, she writes, written out of the agony of exclusion, Merle Feld's poem reflects the gendered experiences that are present in our sacred texts. Her words express hope and expectation for a time when together we reimagine Jewish tradition to include the experiences and contributions of all of us. Her words call us to imagine what it felt like to stand at Sinai for all who have been othered. We ask, how do the voices and experiences of women, Jews of color, the elderly, differently abled, queer and transgender, and Jewish adjacent in our community enhance the tapestry of our tradition? What does it mean to remember that moments together when, in a place where all of us have a place and a voice in Torah, we were recreating holy time and sparks were flying, right? So to me, first of all, you can read this poem, you can get it right there. You don't have to kind of figure out who's Ezekiel and, what's he talking about? And, okay, this is interesting, but I have to go back to it again. Here, we just get it. So there's an example of a call to action right there. And again, I call her writing prophet-like, right? She's certainly not a prophet. And what happened was in this book, there were 179 contributors. Some wrote just a commentary like Cantor Fogelman, a short one, on how does the Haftarah connect to the Torah portion of the holiday, about 250 words. Others brought forward an alternative text from everywhere in Judaism. The only exclusion is Torah because it goes with the Torah portion, right? But it was everything from, you could just imagine, right? Poetry, here's an example, right? Maimonides, Hillel and Shammai, um, uh, uh, the most controversial is Karl Marx. He had some good ideas. He wasn't the proudest Jew, but he had good ideas about caring for one another. I always say that, I think people would kind of prefer Groucho Marx to Karl Marx, but there is a fabulous passage from The Chosen, the book by Chaim Potok, that is just really powerful, right? And the idea there is that the rabbi's talking to Reuben and talking about how, we are nothing, right? We're so little. We're, a blink of an eye. But the eye that blinks, that's something. And he goes into this. So there's song lyrics. There's part of a play about a love scene between Jonathan and between Jonathan and David, right? And so anyway, so here, right, is a different way to understand Haftarah that we could bring forward. So given where we are, I want to be able to give you an alternative for Juneteenth. And the embarrassing part is I have not learned how to pronounce this first name, so forgive me in advance. But this was brought forward by Cantor David Fair from Why Black Lives Matter to People for Whom God Promised a Holy Place by, I think it's Gray, but I don't know, Hagen. For those of us who live our lives through Blackness, and by the way, everyone who brought forward an alternative we have one alternative in the book for American Jewish holidays, as we call them, where there's no Haftarah. So it could be like Tu B'Shvat, where there's none, or like Juneteenth, right? There are 42 of them. I mean, we put out a call to action, a call to submission, and there were 42 that came forward, and we just kept saying, yes, yes, yes. The only no really was if it was from Torah, but that wasn't going to be, and if it was already used, that we weren't going to have like duplicates. But here, okay, so here it is. For those of us who live our lives through Blackness, we cannot separate our duty as Jews from our fears of being strange in a land that though of our birth still does not recognize us fully as present. As Jews who cannot separate from our Blackness, we inhabit spaces of silent loss. We struggle to rise as mourners in spaces that call for us to remember our time as slaves in Egypt, to remember that we are not safe as Jews, that are inhabited by the call, never again. For we are descendants of slaves with no great escape story, no great memorial to our suffering, no great God to intervene on our behalf, to choose us, to form us as a people. And yet for many of us who inhabit both Blackness and Jewishness, we feel the deep divide as the parting of the seas. For if our images of our great escape maintain the dichotomy of light versus dark, would the sea fall in on us? Would we be cast aside, swept away in the great tide? Would we be held tight and carried with as much care as the bread we did not have time to rise? And so many with faces and with skin so similar to mine remain in bondage and isolation, removed from a people still struggling. Will we return to the voice of we in our demand to let my people go? To me, it's just breathtaking to hear this and to be able to read this aloud. So Cantor David Fair writes a commentary about it. And I'll just read parts of it, but I'll point you where I'm reading, right? Many American Jews see Juneteenth as a holiday for Black Americans quite unconnected to Judaism. Yes, Juneteenth celebrates Black freedom from American slavery, but it's not a holiday that white Jews have no relationship with. On the contrary, the concept of slavery is profoundly Jewish. Slavery is one of the most discussed topics throughout the Torah. So we have this right in terms of, he gives us all kinds of examples. Sorry, I have something in my way to click forward. Okay. Even our liturgy is filled with, right? So we have all these examples. We Jews are no stranger to talking about slavery. White Jewish Americans have an opportunity, this is the call to action, to be among greatest advocates for Black American voices. If you are white, I invite you to let your children see you socializing with Black people. Then watch them mimic this behavior. buy books, and watch movies with well-rounded Black protagonists. Find a way to ask your principal if your child can have a Black teacher. When you begin to anger people by voicing words of racial justice, only then will you truly be on your way to being a pursuer of justice. So this is an example, right, of what can come forward when we can hear prophetic voices. Some are actually prophets, not only bound by Haftarah, but more of the prophets, like I gave an example. And some are prophet-like voices, like, in my opinion, those were two great ones, but there's so many remarkable voices that were brought forward that can help us to hear. So with that, time is just about up, so you were stuck hearing my voice the whole time. This is the book. I'm not trying to do sales, except I kind of am, because what people brought forward was just breathtaking, and those were just some examples. So final comments, or if you want to write in the chat or anything, I would love to hear from you. You probably have 30 seconds, so I don't get to hear from you too much. But if you can, write what you think about this idea of prophetic voices, about being called to action. Do get this book, Loving Our Bones, because it is so remarkably amazing. As is, I'm looking at this one on my shelf, Subversive Sequels in the Bible. Judy Klitzner is just a breathtakingly able person also to be able to write. So I thank you all very much. Yeah, companion alternative, right. So absolutely, right. So part of this is, it could be for someone who's more traditional, you're just looking at the interpretations, right? So the alternatives could be like on a Tuesday at a board meeting, or on a Tuesday just for your own study, or hey, this connects into this time of year. That doesn't have to be from the Bima, but my whole intention is to not have the prophets imprisoned on the Bima, right? The idea is that they're calling us to action. So we got to take it forward in order to enact this and be able to change our world that is much needed. Yes, so I have to figure out how to give you a copy of the presentation. So I'm going to see what I can do about getting that done. And
Barbara, I would suggest what I've seen other presenters do is if you put your email address in the chat, people can email you after if they're interested in the slides, and then that might be an easier way to share it with
that's a
them.
great way. All right, because I didn't do it as Google Slides, so that would make it as a PowerPoint. Yeah, so please do feel free to be in touch. Just stay on for 1 second as I'm typing my email. Yes, okay. Yeah, please do, and I'm happy to give you my slides. And whatever way we can bring forward prophetic voices. Again, one idea is just simply, if you feel it can go between blessings, right? If it can be surrounded by blessings, that's how our call to participation for the book was. Find your own, right? Find your own. But we need to hear these voices, because so many others are coming at us, and we need to be called forward. So again, thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Hag Sameach.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was an incredible session. I'll also just shout out, someone wrote in the chat the book you were referring to earlier, Loving Our Bones, by Julia Watts Bedelsser. So I'm excited to read that book. Thank
Oh,
you for sharing. And yes, thank you so much.